One of the main topics in grandMA3 version 2.4 is the phaser improvements and the phaser workflow in general. And the first element I want to show you here is a new pool we have, which is called the shapes pool. You can see it down here in my show file. So shapes is something like curves, and you can use these curves directly in your programmer or later also in recipes to adjust your phasers in a very simple way. So let's do one example. We select a group here and we bring this group to full, and you know how to create very simple phasers in the encoder bar. We have as first a red preset, and then we switch to the next step, and in the second step we have a blue preset, for example. Wonderful, our phaser is running, and now we can apply the shapes to this phaser. So you can say, for example, I want to have a ramp up, and you can see here how the curve of the color attributes is adjusted to a curve which is then doing this typical ramp up situation, or a ramp down where it's exactly the other way around. We have some more very useful shapes like a trapeze. You can see how the curve is now adjusted to this trapeze form. Or we have something very special, which is, for example, half of a sinus wave. So you can see this here, how you get a half sine wave now. And the great thing is now that the workflow is exactly as you know it already. We can apply some MA tricks to that. For example, let's have a look how it looks like when we apply 90 degrees. You can see our halfway sine wave with a half of red in this case. And this is going with a 90 degrees phase to this phaser we created. Maybe you want to have some two wings in this, and you can easily adjust and program your nice phaser. And again, the workflow now is the same as before. We can store it somewhere in a preset or a queue. So for example, we want to store a color preset with that. You can see all the values are directly in there. So let's clear this out. We have our spots again. We bring them to full. We select the preset, and you can see our phaser is ready to go. So a nice new thing, which this new shapes pool in version 2.4 to easily apply some curves to your running phasers. Let's also have a more detailed look at our shapes here. So we can use the shapes directly in our programmer, and the nice thing about these objects is that we can adjust them to our personal needs. So let's do the following. We have a look at our shapes pool here, and we copy one of those default shapes we have in here. You can see there are some default shapes prepared for you already, and these objects are locked so that you can't change them. But of course, what we can do is, for example, to copy our linear curve and paste them somewhere else here. You can see it's now not locked anymore, and we can edit the whole thing. And what you can see here is, let's say the shape itself. So you can see the curve here. And the nice thing is you can adjust this curve here. So you can adjust those handles in here directly to adjust the curve to your personal needs. You can also use the sliders here at the bottom of this window to adjust this shape how you would need it. You can also change here to a sheet view, which is here at the top left corner. And you can see that you can add some values, attributes, or curves here. So what we can do here, especially in the curve section, is, for example, we can have a look at our two steps we have at the moment and adjust some predefined curves you have here. So for example, an ease in, and for the second step, we want to have an ease out. So let's see how it would look like in the 1D view. So you can see here a slight smooth curve in, and then a slight smooth curve out. And again, you can use the handles to adjust the shape to your personal needs. So a very customizable tool where you can create your own curves. When we go back to the sheet view, you might wonder why we can add some attributes and values here. I want to show you this. When we close this editor again, you can see that also in these predefined shapes, there are some shapes that can use a curve together with an attribute already. You can see this, for example, with the small white tiles here, which are a little bit too comparable what you know from the presets, so from all presets, for example, where you store dimmer, position, and color attributes, and you might have these markers with the white tiles to show you which attributes are stored in there. So for example, in this circle shape, you can see here the second white tile, so the second attribute in your encoder bar, which is here the position. Of course, for a circle we need position. So let's see how we can make use of these shapes here. We clear our programmer, and I have my spots maybe again. We bring them to full, and we have a nice fixed position. And I can directly use this shapes, circle shapes now. So what you can see here is that directly having the fixed position, the absolute position here, a relative circle is shaped around this fixed fan out position. So this is the situation where you can make use of these shapes directly wherever you are and have a nice phaser running. And again, as we learned it before already, we can apply some MA tricks here. So you might want to apply 360 degrees. You want to have two wings, and maybe you want to have a mirrored circle. And immediately with this simple to use shape, you created a mirrored circle for your selection of fixtures. And again, same story as before. You can make use of this now in your programmer and store it as a preset or directly in a queue. Version 2.4 doesn't only present us the new shapes and the shapes pool, but a wonderful new addition to your phaser workflow, which will not only streamline your workflow and the way of programming phasers, but it will give you also new features and functionality you were waiting for a long time. And I'm 100% sure you will like this. So let's have a look what we have. With the version 2.4, we get the new tool of phaser recipes. And I want to show you how we can work with this. Phaser recipes in general can help us to create phasers and put the phaser workflow more into the workflow of the well-known recipes. So you don't have two different workflows anymore, but it all feels more like the same and the same approach of programming. So let's have a look. First of all, we can use our new phaser recipes in the programmer. And what do we do therefore? We create here a new window, and in the Common tab, you will find the recipe editor. And the recipe editor got a little bit a new look now, because what you can do here in the bottom right corner is you can add a phaser recipe. So we will click on that one. And you can see the new phaser recipe editor here. What you can do here is you simply work like before. So you simply add your different ingredients to your phasers. So what you can see here, for example, is we have automatically a new phaser recipe line, which gives us a step number 1 and a step number 2. Great. So what we want to do is to add a selection. We are here at the selection field, and this area is quite cool because it's context sensitive. So wherever you are here in your phaser recipe line, it will give you the possibility to directly select a group. So like our spots. When we switch, for example, to the shape cell, you learned about shapes already in the video before, then we can select a shape here. So we will directly get our shapes pool here. So for example, we just want to have a simple sine wave. We scroll a little bit to the right, and we can add attributes here. So what are we doing is we just add a wonderful dimmer, and you can see already the phaser is running because these are the phaser recipes in the programmer. So this was more or less like we did with the encoder bar before, but in a new shape here with the phaser recipe editor. When we scroll more to the right, you can also see that we can add some speed here or a phase value. The nice thing is also in the context sensitive area that we have the MA3 here again. So maybe we want to put 360 degrees and your phaser is running, and the same workflow as before. you can store this now as a preset or directly in a queue. So a new way of working with the phasers, with the new phaser recipes. And in the next videos, I will show you where else you can use it and which new functionality you get with that. Let's stay in the programmer with our phaser recipes for a while, but let's have a look what else we can do with them. So what I would like to show you now is we clear the whole thing again, and we select one of our groups here and we bring them to full. So now we want to create a color phaser with the new phaser recipes in our programmer. So as before, we would select add phaser recipe in our recipe editor. And this time we also take the selection here, which is then our spots grid. What you can do else is also to have a specific fixture selection in your programmer and then use the take selection button, which is pretty handy if you have specific fixture selection actually in your programmer and you just want to take it for your new phaser recipe you are creating. So this can become quite handy here. But let's select the group here first, and as a shape, let's say we want to have a ramp up, which is wonderful. This time we don't select the attributes, but we want to have some values here. And the cool thing is we can click here in a value cell. We can use absolute or relative values. And we have our presets here, like the dimmer, position, gobo, but also the color presets. And here easily we can select, for example, red in the first step. And in the second step, we want to have a cyan. Yeah, why not? So, and we can see already that we have this shape here running with the ramp up between our red and cyan. And again, what we can do is to go into our settings here and have a look. We want to have, for example, let's say a phase of 90 degrees, which is nice. And we want to have 2 wings. So quite cool. And again, the same thing as before. We can now store it directly in a preset or we store it in a queue. So also with the existing presets, you can easily use the phaser recipes to create your new phasers in this new additional workflow. And this is very important, always with the reference to the original existing presets. As I told you before, we can use the phaser recipes not only in our programmer, so here in the recipe editor, but also in presets and even in queues. So what we can do is, for example, to have a look at our position presets to build a position phaser now. And we can go in here to an empty preset and say edit settings. And what you can see here on the right hand side is very familiar to you because you know this from the recipe editor we discussed before. So also here you can now add a phaser recipe. And then this whole interface and the editor will turn into something you know now already with the new phaser recipes we discussed. So also in the preset and as I mentioned in the queues, you can have this editor to create your phaser recipes directly in here. What is the big advantage? You can do it without seeing this in the programmer. So you can do it, let's say it in an offline way. So let's see what we can do. Again, we have our area here where we have the phaser recipe lines and the area below, which is then context sensitive. So let's take a group again. This time we want to maybe add a shape which is a linear movement and we want to create something with position. So we go to the absolute values, we select our positions and maybe the first step should be a fan out position and we want to have a roof floor position in the second step. And what we want to do is also to add a face here, which is then 360. So cool, we've done this. As soon as we are ready with this, you can see everything is white here, nothing is red, so it seems to work. Let's fingers crossed. And then we can see a new preset here, which is our fan out and roof floor preset, so it's automatically renamed to the preset names we used. Of course, we can relabel it again to our personal needs, but what we should see now is our spots when we bring them to full and we call that preset, that you can have this movement as you did with the fan out and the roof floor position. Of course, now what you can easily do is to adjust this again with MA3. You can also go in here again and adjust your preset directly here. What you can do, for example, is we want to turn down the speed a little bit. So we want to use maybe 30 BPM. You can see it's also done in the MA3 directly. And what we can do now is to use the add button here at the bottom right, because so far nothing happened. But when we press the add button and close the editor, you can see that it's now directly also at the output. So again, you can use this editor as a kind of offline editor to make adjustments. And as soon as you are ready, you can call the presets or use the add button in the phaser recipe editor to bring your changes to the output. I promised new functionality, and you will get new functionality. And this is for sure something most of you have waited for a long time now, which is the end shot phasers. So what we can do here is I prepared a small dimmer phaser, and you can see why I didn't become a lighting designer and why most of the world is happy about this. But I want to show you the functionality with that. So you can see here just a small dimmer chase running through my selections of fixtures from the left to the right, which is great. We can have a look at the dimmer preset here, and you can see already this is a phaser recipe, what I've done here. So you see my phaser recipe line with the selection. The shape is chase in this case, and we did it with the dimmer attributes. Nice, it is quite fast, and you have a phase from 0 through 360. So nothing that spectacular so far. What we can do now is when we scroll a little bit to the right, is that you see the new column end shot here. And this is the place where we can define how many shots we want to give our phaser. So for example, it should just run one time from the left to the right. Then we can just enter 1 here, which is nice. We close our editor. We clear the programmer for the moment. And then we have a look at our preset. And we see the phaser is just running one time and then it's off. So what I can do with that now is, of course, I can take this and store this on one of my playbacks. And what I want to do now is to assign the top functionality here. So if you assign, or if you go to assign menu and you have a look at the functionalities, you will find top here. What is top doing when the queue is running and when the queue is over? It would then, when you press the button, automatically go to the top of the list again. So it would restart your one-shot phaser. So this is something where you can easily create your one-shot phasers to use them as a kind of bump afterwards. So we clear this whole thing, and you can see if I press top, then it is running one time and again and again and again. So I can use this as my one-shot bumps here directly. Let's also have a look at some more details of this end shot functionality. So if we go in there, you can see our one shot at the moment. We have several possibilities to give some end shots. So for example, we can do this up to 128. So you can enter whatever number you like to. And you can also enter numbers like 2.5. So if you say 2.5, it will run 2.5 times through your phaser steps, which can be also a little nice creative element here. And what you can decide as well is what should happen after your end shots. So should the last value stay, yes or no? That's what you decide with this small little button here at the top left corner. So by default, end shot stay is no, which means after your shots, the phaser is turned off. If you set this to yes, the last step of your phaser will stay at your output and will give you the last value as soon as you, for example, clear the programmer or as you turn off the sequence. Sometimes we all need a little bit of direction. So our phasers do. And that's why we added a new functionality to the phaser recipes as well, which is called direction. And this is also something you've waited for a long time now, because sometimes you want to decide in which direction a phaser should run. So we are back at our dimmer phaser here, which is still running, nice. And we have a look at our phaser recipe editor. When we scroll to the right, you know, we talked about N-shot already. And the next playback option we can find here is the direction. So at the moment, this phaser is running forward, which is nice, but we can also decide here to run it backward, for example. Let's press the add button here to apply it directly to the output. And you can see that now our dimmer phaser is running backwards through my fixture selection. But what else can we do? We can again do the edit settings here. We have a look at our direction, and next to forward and backward we can also choose an alternate. So alternate should be forth and back. So we select the alternate, press add again, and you see that now the phaser is running alternate. So forward and then backward and forward and backward. And again, you can combine this, of course, with the N-shot or with different shapes. So try these things out. You can be quite creative with this one, including the direction to your phasers. Let's also talk about a new functionality in the phaser recipes, which can be wonderfully helpful in some situations. So what you can see here is I created a quite impressive phaser again. So we have this dimmer snap running from the left to the right at my mid-truss. So all of these 5 fixtures, they are doing this dimmer phaser from the left to the right. Of course, what we can do in the phaser recipe lines is we can change our ingredients as we are used to from recipes in general. So if I don't want to see this on my mid-truss, but I want to see it on my back truss, I can easily go in there and change it to the back truss. What did we realize now? Of course, the phaser seems to be faster in this case because we have more fixtures here on the back truss. You can see 8 of them here compared to 5 on the mid truss. So of course, for one phaser cycle, the changes between the fixtures have to be faster now to stay within my 60 BPM. But sometimes I want to make sure that especially the steps of my phaser, they are at the same speed as before. So the fixtures want to change in the same speed from on to off and to on and to off again. What we can do here is to use a new functionality in the phaser recipes, which says adaptive measure. And adaptive measure is super helpful if you have different fixture selections. You want to use the same phaser on these different groups, on these different selections with a different number of fixtures. So it will automatically adjust the measure to the fact that the phaser stays in the same speed then. So let's change this to yes. You can also see that sometimes this setting is also in a shape directly again. So maybe you have a look at the chase shape. You will find this setting directly set to yes there. In this case, we want to set it to yes manually here. And what you can see is that we have a specific speed now, which is then our 60 BPM. So each second another light turns on. And also when I change my fixture selection now in this phaser recipe line, so I want to change it from my back truss to the mid truss again, you can say it stays the same speed. So also 1 second for each fixture, because the measure is then automatically adapted to the new amount of fixtures we have in our selection. So this will in general help us to adjust our phasers to the beats of the music in a very automatic way and in a very simple way to achieve. So try this out.